that no one seems to know who knew what, when, who didn't know, or who should have known. Certainly Nova Scotians should have been told about this big mistake of $27 million. What taxpayers want to know is who knew and why did they allow a deliberate misinformation to take place.
Order, please. The word deliberate has been ruled many times in this House as unparliamentary, so I'd remind the honourable member, and probably by yourself.
And many times it wasn't appropriate, but this time it is. Mr. Speaker, I'll withdraw that comment.
Thank you.
They allow this misinformation to continue on to the public after the Auditor General said this morning that there was time to correct such a mistake. My question to the Deputy Premier: was the Chief of Staff for the Premier kept informed about the budget developments, and did he know about the $27 million error?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I will say is it was when we gave the announcement and it was made public at the appointed time, and it was done. Who was in the room? I don't know, Mr. Speaker. There's many people come in the room. If people had been in cabinet or in various committees, people come and go all the time, Mr. Speaker. What I'm telling you is when it had to be tabled, we tabled it. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Nichelle Ben, a 25-year-old woman with cognitive and physical disabilities, faces criminal charges because of this government's refusal to act. As a result of her organic brain disorder, Nichelle has violent episodes and has been a harm to herself and at times others. The protocol, as directed by the Department of Community Services, is to call police when Nichelle has these episodes. Will the Minister of Community Services consider Nichelle's individual needs and the pleas of her mother to reverse departmental protocol that forces this young, cognitively disabled young woman into incarceration?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I understand the issues with families when they have a loved one that has a disability, and in fact, I have met personally with Nichelle's mom to discuss the issues, and it's important to know that Nichelle is deemed legally as a competent individual, and that we've had many discussions. The staff has had discussion with her family. These issues are much, much more complex than the opposition member is trying to portray, and we have been working through the issue that is at hand for us to do. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nichelle Ben's mom is worried about her daughter's future. She's worried her daughter is going to be the next Ashley Smith. The current probation order against her daughter has no deterring effect because it can't. Nichelle has a brain disorder. There are other Nichelles across the province who are being directed to the criminal justice system because this government invokes police intervention. Will the Minister for Community Services please tell Nichelle Ben's mother and all the parents advocating for children with cognitive disabilities why this government will not change this devastating policy?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the member opposite once again is misleading people with the wrong type of information. And the fact is each case is different. You cannot put them all together as one, and it depends on the circumstances. There was a third-party individual that was at risk at that point in time. There's other options that we have spoken to the family about with regards to bringing down the level of the aggressive behavior. So there's many, many different particulars, like as I said, that go along with this issue, but we have have worked very hard to communicate with the family by sitting down and speaking personally with her mom, and with all those who have been involved have been working very hard with this young lady, and she is seeming to do well at this point. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her final supplementary.
Well, that's very interesting because I spoke to Nichelle's mom this morning, and she told me she feels like she's in the dark about her daughter's fate. If this minister is, in fact, working with the Minister of Justice on the issue, as she said last week, why is she not communicating with Nichelle's mother about it?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, after I met with Nichelle's mother, I put a team of staff together to be working towards programming for Nichelle. And we also have been talking with the facility with Nichelle. And the main point that the member doesn't understand opposite is that Nichelle is competent within the law, which means that Nichelle is the one that is able to speak for herself. I do understand the frustrations from the mom, because when you have a child that has an issue, you love that child. I have a child myself, and I would go to the ends of the earth for him. So I respect Nichelle's mother for doing the advocacy work that she has been doing. Thank you.
The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My questions to the Deputy Premier and Chair of the Treasury Board as well. The Auditor General identified a $27 million error in last year's budget on March 28, 2012. We know that it was drawn to the department's attention. We know as a fact that other charges were made, but mysteriously, the $27 million change was not made, even though from what we can see, there was plenty of time to make that change. So does the Deputy Premier confirm that the $27 million error was known by Treasury Board at or before the meeting on March 28th of 2012?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned and I answered in the previous question, Mr. Speaker, we, when it was materially responsible to make this figure public, we did it.
The honourable member for Argyll on his first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the minister said in one of the previous questions, that many people come in and out of those meetings. Typically, various officials attend Treasury Board meetings. Typically, the Premier, of course, is kept informed about the budget as it's being developed, because, of course, it's so fundamental. If he isn't, that's a serious abdication of that responsibility. It would be incredibly surprising if the Premier's office staff were not at that March 28th meeting. Were officials from the Premier's own office kept informed of the budget developments by Treasury Board, including the $27 million? And specifically, was the Premier's Chief of Staff kept informed by the Treasury Board or Finance of budget developments, including the $27 million error?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the member who's asking the question knows that out of Treasury Board, we issue minute letters, and people would read those minute letters. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Argyll on his final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I mean, these are very basic questions. Mr. Speaker, we believe that Nova Scotians, of course, deserve those answers. So, you know, really the question we're trying to answer, or trying to get an answer to, is was the $27 million error known by Treasury Board at or before that March 28th meeting? Who from the Premier's office was kept informed of budget developments, including the $27 million, and was the Premier's Chief of Staff provided with information about that $27 million error?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I will say, there was no error. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, this government has been in favour of the deal presented by Emira for Muskrat Falls before they knew what the deal was, before they knew what would be in the deal, before they knew what the costs were. And in fact, despite this splashy roadshow they've just gone on, they still can't answer basic questions that people have. which frankly, since the Premier and Energy Minister have said this project is so cost beneficial to Nova Scotia, they should have right on the tips of their tongues. So Mr. Speaker, will the Minister tell Nova Scotians what will the price per kilowatt hour be for Muskrat Falls once it reaches Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. Certainly, the Maritime Link, the Muskrat Falls, is a very important project for Nova Scotians, and the project has been well researched and worked on by both Emera and by Nalcor in Newfoundland and Labrador. And the UARB has the responsibility to determine what is the best price, is it fair and just for the ratepayers of this province. That process is now underway and will be wrapped up by midsummer, and we'll wait the determination of the UARB.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
So the Minister doesn't know, is basically the answer. He doesn't know what it's going to cost. Mr. Speaker, the Minister talked about research. He commissioned the Dalton report under a set of very limited conditions, which he knew would result in the answer he wanted. And I suspect the government did not expect that so many people and experts in the field would point out the errors in the assumptions made in that report. For example, the fact that the imported power assumptions were incorrect, as has been recently presented. The fact that he costed in an additional natural gas pipeline on the natural gas prices, despite the fact that Nova Scotia Power has announced they're probably proceeding with that anyhow, even with Muskrat Falls. So, Mr. Speaker, why was the Dalton report limited in the options it could look at, and why did the government allow estimates to be made of imports without Dalton even contacting directly export suppliers such as Hydro-Quebec?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess the honourable member probably has a better direct line to Hydro-Quebec than others would have, but Mr. Dalton is a well-respected energy expert. He's worked for the province of Nova Scotia for more than 12 years. He's worked for the province of New Brunswick and various states in the U.S. And he lives by his credibility. He lives by his reputation. He's called to be an expert witness at public hearings, and the evidence he has to defend. He has to present it in be fully tested by interveners at whatever hearing he's at. So he's going to be before the UARB, and he'll have to defend the evidence, the information he's found that shows that the Maritime Link is the lowest cost option for Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know this government has suddenly become very anti-Quebec, with the Premier consulting on a federal bill with the NDP to help break up Canada more easily. And the fact, but once in the last session, and I will table this, in one of the last sessions, the Premier actually trumpeted energy from Hydro-Quebec. This was just this was just about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, when he said, this will be our chance to bring more energy from Hydro-Quebec. Now he's suddenly against it. Very odd. You know, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia Power has submitted information to the Utility and Review Board stating they approached Hydro-Quebec a few years ago, and it was available. At the time, they couldn't get the price they wanted. Well, and I'll table that. But they have publicly claimed it was available. Yet, in the legislature in Quebec, and I will table this, a month ago it was found that Hydro-Quebec has extensive surplus energy which they are trying to offload cheaply to suppliers. We know that Vermont and Rhode Island have since signed on for that. Mr. Speaker, we know that that energy is available. We know now from the legislature in Quebec in February that that energy is available cheaply. Will the minister commit to having the evidence that is submitted to the board by his department updated and corrected for all the errors? And frankly, will he have the report corrected so that it seeks out formal proposals from possible import suppliers before the hearings begin?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's really, really hard to determine if the Liberal Party is supporting Hydro-Quebec or they're supporting the Maritime Link. And the member mentioned a quote from from Quebec. I want to maybe bring up a quote as well, Mr. Speaker. It's the leader of the Liberal Party had this to say in Hansard about a year ago, March the 30th. He said that the Lower Churchill Falls is an important project that I believe will allow us to move towards a more renewable, sustainable energy market in Atlantic Canada. Yet, just a few months later, he had this to say about the Lower Churchill. He said, quote, "It's a bad deal." So I'm trying to figure out why they're flip-flopping around here in two different directions. So, Mr. Speaker, is the Liberal Party, are they supporting Nova Scotians or are they supporting Hydro-Quebec?
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on a new question.
You know, Mr. Speaker, the position of the Liberal caucus has been quite clear, and unfortunately nobody else in Nova Scotia has had a problem identifying it. We think Muskrat Falls has potential. The deal that this government has signed on to lacks answers, and this government doesn't have them. You know, and Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. We are not the only ones. Mr. Speaker, the Premier received a letter recently, which I will table, which asked the minister to give the Utility and Review Board more time. The Consumer Advocate wrote a letter to the Premier asking that the Utility and Review Board be given more time because the answers are not available. The Small Business Advocate wrote a letter, and I'll table that, to the Premier asking that more time. The Canadian Wind Energy Association has also criticized this government. So, Mr. Speaker, why is this government continuing to refuse the URB more time to review the Muskrat Falls deal when almost every intervener except for his department is asking for it?
The Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess we can both answer the question, but you know, we're in this House here last spring, and we debated and talked about the Maritime Link Act, and as I recall, the Liberal Party fully supported the Maritime Link Act, as did the Conservative Party. We had regulations out last summer that everybody had an opportunity to comment on, not a comment from the Liberal Party about those regulations. And now I hear they want more time. I understand a lot of that information that's available has been previous documents and reports that have always been available to them. And we feel strongly that a half a year is sufficient time. And the UARB, if they want more time, they'll come to us. But really, half a year is sufficient time.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to declare, first of all, we did point out that the time might be an issue at the time, and even recently, this minister said that the Consumer Advocate was okay with it, so it was fine. Well, you know what? The Consumer Advocate is not okay with it now. I tabled that letter, so it's time for the minister to fix that. You know, Mr. Speaker, the fact is we won't even know the cost. He stands up and says, well, the Utility and Review Board can look at it. Well, here is the overview from Emera, which says that the final cost won't be known for the link for ratepayers until 2017. That is well after the review. Mr. Speaker, they're not even going to file the final capital costs until this fall, which is months after the Utility and Review Board has to make a decision. So, Mr. Speaker, does the minister think it's right that the NDP timeline, which basically nobody thinks is correct anymore or is enough time, means a decision will be made on a project while the final numbers won't even be filed until late this fall, and Nova Scotians won't, and the URB won't even know what the rate is until 2017? Does he think that's okay?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'm trying to figure out whether the Liberal Party is in favour of the Maritime Link or perhaps more in favour of something else. But we fully consulted with the UARB. We consulted with the other interveners there, the Small Business Advocate and the Avon Group and the Consumer Advocate and so on, and everybody said, yeah, they had enough time. And if the UARB feels they need more time, it's up to them to come forward with that proposal.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed in the Minister of Energy. We've come to expect that the misleading and incorrect statements about the opposition would come from the member from Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville. Not from him, but I guess he's picking up some tips there. You know, Mr. Speaker, he just stood and said, well, if they want more, people want more time, they should ask. I just tabled letters from almost every single intervener signed asking for more time. Mr. Speaker, the Consumer Advocate, who the minister said was one of the people that said 6 months was enough, has said more time is needed. The small business advocate says more time is needed. So, Mr. Speaker, will the government heed the call of the consumer advocate, the small business advocate, the Canadian Wind Energy Association, and so many more who have asked for more time so that this project can be properly reviewed and we can have the answers that Nova Scotians deserve that these guys want to hide?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said previously, we have fully consulted with the UARB, and we're still continuing to work with them if required. I just want to quote what the honourable member from Dartmouth East had to say on May the 10th of last year, talking about legislation that requires the UARB will review the proposed undersea cable. It says Liberal energy critic Andrew Younger said he's satisfied with the legislation. So I'll table that, Mr. Speaker.
Leo? Order, please. Order. The Honourable Minister would know that by calling somebody by their name in the legislature is unparliamentary. The Honourable Minister would know that naming somebody in any matter, whether it's a resolution or a question, is, I would ask the Honourable Member to retract that. Thank you.
I'll retract the first name. Yes.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on a new question.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he did call me Mr., so I was happy with that. Mr. Speaker, this really isn't complicated. The Act did not have the timeline in it. We supported the Act because it was the Premier that went out and said, oh, we don't need an Act, it's going to be reviewed. Then he found out, no, actually you do need legislation, and he was wrong, as he so often is. You know, he had to come in and fix that. We were happy he fixed that. We were happy he brought in that legislation. Too bad they gutted it in the regulations. Mr. Speaker, the fact is, you know, this is just about strengthening the monopoly that Nova Scotia Power has. In yesterday's throne speech, the government claimed to support increased competition in the electricity market, and I will table that. This is despite the fact that at every turn they have opposed competition in the energy market. They have chosen a deal which allows Emera to make profit at every turn for Muskrat Falls, rather than the other option which Emera has put forward, which is through a power purchase agreement. So, Mr. Speaker, how can this government talk about increasing competition in the electricity market in its throne speech, while at every turn fighting competition and choosing to give Nova Scotia Power the upper hand?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, the Maritime Link is the lowest cost option for Nova Scotians, according to the Dalton report that's been commissioned. It's the lowest or the best option on an environmental front as far as reducing our greenhouse gas targets and meeting the federal coal regulations. And I know the UARB will look at all the evidence and test that, and interveners will question it and to determine what is right for ratepayers. So, and the rate of return is also part of that. So the UARB has that responsibility and goal, and I'm sure they'll look at all the evidence before they make an informed decision.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
No, Mr. Speaker, this morning the board put out a letter to the interveners saying, basically, we're responding to the request to extend the timeline at the board. They said we can't because the minister won't let us. They said we will adjust some of the other timelines within there, but the decision date and the hearing date has to stay the same. You know, I am going to table that. You know, you know, Mr. Speaker.
Haven't you seen it?
You know, Mr. Speaker, I would hope the minister's already actually seen that letter that amends the timelines. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, this government is choosing to support a deal that he stands up and says is the cheapest and lowest cost, yet he can't tell us what the cost is. He says there's going to be enough time at the board to review it, and yet every intervener except his own department has said more time is needed. So, Mr. Speaker, why does this government think that this deal is better with Emera having the opportunity to make as much profit as possible rather than waiting until we actually have the numbers?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly the Muskrat Falls, Lower Churchill is part of our energy plan, and but there's a whole lot more to it than that. We've had the opportunity to go around the province over the last number of weeks and engaged with Nova Scotians in our energy tour. In fact, we had over 500 Nova Scotians that come out to our various meetings from Yarmouth to Sydney. And they're able to talk about our energy plan, includes the Muskrat Falls, but includes diversification into wind power and tidal power and sustainable biomass and natural gas and native hydroelectricity, as well as what we're importing from Newfoundland and Quebec. So it's all designed to get us off of coal that governments in the past have relied on for far, far too long. And it's all about diversification and providing the lowest, fairest rates in electricity for Nova Scotians.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, this is no different than when the government rigged the South Canoe project so that Nova Scotia Power could hide some of their costs and then bring it to ratepayers in turn to not have a fixed cost when the other renewable energy suppliers were offering to supply cheaper energy at a fixed cost over a longer term. You know, Mr. Speaker, this minister is doing everything he possibly can to pad Nova Scotia Power's bottom line and to protect their monopoly, time after time after time again. And now he doesn't want to give the board more time. I just tabled a letter which showed their amended time frame, which part of a three-part filing they did today. The cover letter for that, which showed that they are amending the timeline. The other day they put out a statement saying that they are unable to do. The other day, they put out a statement which clearly said, well, I did. You asked me, Mr. Speaker, you asked me to table the letter I had. I tabled the letter I had. I said at the time it's part of a three-part document. Mr. Speaker, why does this government give Emera and Nova Scotia Power whatever they want while throwing independent renewable energy suppliers under the bus?
Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, I had an opportunity to have a look at the Liberal website on their energy solutions on power rates, and you know, on there I find a quote. One of their solutions is to provide energy by importing power from Hydro-Quebec. So again, Mr. Speaker, I have to ask, you know, is the Liberal Party supporting Nova Scotians, or are you supporting Hydro-Quebec?
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this month, the CBRM Mayor and Council released the details of a 5-year, $300 million plan to combat crumbling capital and community infrastructure, support a wastewater strategy, facilities, recreation, and fleet modernization programs. The proposal includes a $150 million commitment from Ottawa, with the CBRM and province investing $75 million each over the next 5 years. My question to the Premier, recalling his recent visit to Sydney and meeting with CBRM Mayor Cecil Clark, does the Premier agree that CBRM's finances are beyond troubling and a major capital plan for the region is required for our survival?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did have the opportunity to travel extensively throughout Cape Breton to work on a number of different projects with a number of different communities. And of course, I was in CBRM, and I did meet with the mayor there. I must say, I did recognize him. His office surroundings and view of the Sydney waterfront is unparalleled. I also agreed with the new mayor that planning a 5-year strategy was the appropriate thing to do. I pointed out to him that this is very similar to the type of approach that we've taken, for example, with the 5-year road paving plan. It's so that we can plan for infrastructure improvements down the road.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The numbers related to the CBRM are alarming and have led to the development of a long-term plan for addressing our many challenges. Sydney is the only city in Atlantic Canada with double-digit unemployment. The CBRM unemployment rate itself sits at 17.5% and, of course, even higher in some Cape Breton communities. The CBRM owns 20% of all required wastewater upgrades in Atlantic Canada, a whopping $454 million, Mr. Speaker. With aging infrastructure and shrinking revenues, our municipality needs an innovative path to develop assets and keep our communities sustainable. So my question to the Premier, at this critical crossroad, would the Premier agree that the province must engage in active and immediate discussions with the CBRM to determine their level of support?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, we have been in touch with obviously having those discussions with CBRM. What we told them was that, of course, what they have produced is kind of a one-line estimate of various projects that, given a new infrastructure Bill Canada fund, we'd be willing to work with them on some of those projects in order to develop them further to actually see what the costs of them would be. And of course, there will be infrastructure spending in the province over the next number of years. And of course, Sydney would be included in that kind of budgeting. Cape Breton would be included in that kind of budget. But I also heard the member ask about innovative ways of doing infrastructure. And you always have to be careful when the Liberals use language like that because, of course, innovative to them the last time they were in government meant toll roads, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
During his visit last week, the Premier told CBC that, quote, a 5-year plan is the right way to go, end quote, and stated that the province would look at sharing in this type of program. The Premier also used social media to say the province will work with the CBRM on its needs. For the CBRM plan to succeed, they require a $75 million commitment from their coffers and $75 million from the provincial government. I'm sure the federal infrastructure funding of $70 billion, coupled with the infrastructure needs being included in yesterday's throne speech, are encouraging for the Mayor and councillors. As we stand now, Mr. Speaker, roadwork will be virtually halted in the CBRM this year due to funding restrictions. So my question to the Premier, as the CBRM elected officials and staff pour over their budget today in an attempt to determine how to proceed with exhausted reserves and residents who are taxed to the breaking point, can the Premier tell the House if he intends to support the CBRM 5-year capital plan?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I believe I just said I thought the 5-year capital plan is indeed the right way to go, multi-year budgeting. We're pleased to work with the Mayor on that plan to look at how it fits in with the new renewed federal budget federal Bill Canada plan, actually. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what we're going to do. We wonder what the Liberals will do. Are they going to bring back tolls on highways? Is that the way they're going to bring infrastructure? Is that what they would do to bring infrastructure into the province? Is it more P3 schools, Mr. Speaker? Is the Liberal plan all about selling infrastructure in Nova Scotia to private owners?
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Yeah, that's where it is. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Deputy Premier. Residents of Gabroos have been patient as they wait for their seawall to get fixed. The wall continues to deteriorate without repairs, and as the Deputy Premier would know, last weekend it suffered some more damage. In the throne speech on page 11, it states, it is the responsibility of government to provide for the safety of the citizens. This is a responsibility that my government accepts and backs with action, is the statement that's made. My question to the Deputy Premier, is this statement a statement that the people of Gabroos can believe that your government will stand by and support?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not one to say this line like thank the member for questioning. I really don't do that, but I will do it in this sense because I appreciate where it's coming from. I appreciate that the member himself and the Mayor went to see the Minister of Fisheries on this very subject of looking after the seawall in Gabroos, in particular how we're going to come about doing that. And in my conversations with the Mayor and so on, it's that if the federal government would just own up to their ownership of that wall and go forward, and we're willing to listen to any kind of funding formulas that if we can accommodate, we would certainly do that for the good people of Gabroos.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for that answer. Mr. Speaker, a number of homes in Gabroos could be damaged or destroyed if this wall is breached. The seawall protects a multi-million-dollar fishery that employs roughly 25 Nova Scotians. And as we heard earlier, unemployment in Cape Breton exceeds 17%. It's one of the 6 highest regions in the country. And every job is vital, and we can't afford to lose any of them. The CBRM has committed to moving forward, and the federal government has agreed to look for funds, hoping that a sharing agreement can be reached. So I take it from the minister's last answer that his government will be prepared to be a funding partner in such an agreement. Is that accurate?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's neither wise nor prudent to negotiate agreements on the floor of this House. Speaker, if the federal government has said time and time again that it doesn't own the seawall, but if indeed there is apparently a change in that, and they want to sit down and talk to us, we'll talk to them, Mr. Speaker. We'll see where it's at, but let's not kid ourselves. The responsibility for that wall is the federal Tory government. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And let's not kid ourselves. This wall was built on provincial land. The government of the government of the day of the federal government 70-odd years ago. You guys might think it's funny, but if you lived in the village of Gabroos and you were looking out your window every day and wondering if your house was going to stay there, it wouldn't be so funny. Now, I'm trying to be calm. Mr. Speaker, if the Premier wants to answer this question for the people of Gabroos, that would be refreshing because he hasn't answered anything so far today. But the reality is, for the people of Gabroos, a report that was done by the Provincial Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal identified that there needed to be work done soon. The former Minister, TIR, has visited the site and he has seen the damage that has been created in the community. What we are asking for is that this government be part of a solution. That's all we're asking for. And I want to know if the Premier will finally show the residents of Gabroos that he stands by his throne speech and that he will convince his cabinet colleagues that it is time to fix the seawall in Gabroos.
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wish that the people of Gabroos had a representative that actually had some sway with their own party, their own representatives in the federal government, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, the reality is, Mr. Speaker, we take all of the infrastructure deficits. We take all.
Cabinet colleague in Ottawa.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we take all of the infrastructure deficits in this province very, very seriously. They were left to us by a government who didn't have the foresight to make the proper maintenance repairs at the time, and we, of course, are struggling among those priorities to make sure that they are properly dealt with.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. The people of Nova Scotia are not buying the fiction that the NDP keeps trying to create. Our economy is struggling. Nova Scotians from across this province know it. In the last year, employment has fallen. There are 6,400 fewer jobs in this province. In fact, while we experience employment losses here, the rest of the country gain jobs. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism explain why he can't seem to face the facts that his $100 million corporate handouts are simply not working for Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after 250 years of Liberal and PC government, they couldn't get it right. We all know that the last 20 years were the worst 20 years in Nova Scotia. In Nova Scotia recent years. We also know that we came in at a time when most things were pretty well devastated, including the economy. We came in at the worst recession in recent history, and Mr. Speaker, we were able, through good management, we've managed to turn that ship around, and now, Mr. Speaker, that the future for Nova Scotians, for the first time in 20 years, Nova Scotians are optimistic, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives put it best when they said that Premier Dexter's assertions of levels of employment were misleading. In the last year, employment has fallen 6,400, Mr. Speaker. Not 20 years, not 250 years. In the last year, employment has fallen by 6,400 Nova Scotians. Our unemployment rate is 1 full point higher than it was last year, and at 9.3% is over 2 points higher than the national average of 7, Mr. Speaker. We have not turned any corner. We're in the same poor economic environment we were under the previous government. In fact, this NDP government has made us even less competitive. Mr. Speaker, why does the Minister of Economic Development continue to ignore the data and says we need a focus instead we need a focus on fundamentals and diversification of our economies, not corporate handouts?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2012, we had more people in Nova Scotia employed than we did when we took over as government, Mr. Speaker. That's a fact, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the last 7 years, we've earned $80 million off the interest alone of our investments, Mr. Speaker. That's $80 million for more investment into schools, into hospitals, Mr. Speaker, community services, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are doing all the right things, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, the proof is in the pudding.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the unemployment rate of 9.3% masks the regional disparities outside of Halifax. 10.4 in the Valley, 12.2 in Southern NS, 12.5 in the North Shore, and of course over 17 in Cape Breton. What's even more troubling is that our youth are struggling with an unemployment rate of a whopping 18.5%. As the CCPA states, quote, despite Premier Dexter's assertions, Nova Scotia is not turning the corner with regards to unemployment, end quote, and I will table that document. My question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism. Why has the Minister forgotten about the unemployed in rural Nova Scotia and the youth who want to stay here and work?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise on my feet and talk about rural Nova Scotia. We know that nobody likes to see job losses anywhere in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the Liberals had their way, the 1,400 jobs at the Port Hawkesbury Mill wouldn't be there today. That's rural Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. That is rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, if the Liberals had their way, Mr. Speaker, IBM wouldn't be coming to Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the Liberals had their way, Mr. Speaker, projects wouldn't be coming to Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. 1,000 jobs coming to Nova Scotia that they would have killed, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Education. Will the Minister tell members of this House today how many school boards will see budget cuts this year?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was very pleased to meet with all of our school boards over the last number of weeks, and I've discussed their targets with them, so every school board in the province knows their target number. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will repeat the question. How many school boards will see budget cuts this year?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that we did with our target, we made sure that we're making sure we're investing in our students, and we have increased our investment, especially in terms of special education. As in all governments and all budget preparations, the budget for the Department of Education is based on our students that are in the province and the students that we serve. And based on our declining enrollment, some of our school boards are seeing increases in their budgets, and a number of school boards are seeing decreases in their budgets based on their enrollments. But we have made sure that we are protecting those areas of the province that have had extreme losses in terms of their student population. So we have capped it at 1.5 with our school boards, so that we are making sure we are protecting those school boards to make sure that we are investing appropriately in our children. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North on her final supplementary.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I guess that would be 5 boards that are receiving budget cuts. So for the minister, I will clarify it is 5. The Nova Scotia Teachers Union states that 700 teachers have already been cut from the system. Students are losing their education assistance, and boards are being forced to choose between paying for power or providing educational programming for much needed supports. Mr. Speaker, under this government, power rates have gone up by 30%. Failing to adequately fund public education is an insult to our students and to our educators. So will the minister commit to the students and the parents today that she will provide the additional funding to boards that they need to cover power rates, so students will not have that money taken from the classroom?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and we are investing appropriately in our students in this province. With the target numbers that I was able to provide to our school boards a couple of weeks ago when I met with them, we recognize that there is a 3% increase for per student investment for our children in this province. Our budget has increased, and we are making sure that our school boards that have seen significant decline are protected. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Colchester North on a new question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Another question that could have a quick and easy answer. Can the minister tell members of this House how many students are waiting for direct service from our school psychologist and our speech-language pathologist?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I don't have that data at my fingertips. That would be information I would need to ask the school boards. But I will say that under the target budget numbers that we gave out a couple of weeks ago, that we recognize that we need a few more people in our system to serve the needs of our students. So there will be more psychologists and speech pathologists hired in the coming year. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and for the minister's information and all others here. That information was requested of school boards. It was submitted by school boards. The department has it, and I will table it for all of the boards. It comes to approximately 2,000 students who are on the wait list for speech language and school psychologists. I would encourage the minister to look at it. It was submitted in June. So was the minister aware of these wait lists when she announced further cuts to public education?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that I look forward to is that during our budget estimate debates, I look forward to the questions from the honourable member, and will answer them willingly at that time. I do not have the data in front of me to answer the questions that she's asking about the budget, but I am looking forward to that in the coming days. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North. on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I guess my question to the minister would be, that information was available. It was in the minister's hands. It should have been used when the minister was preparing budgets. So my question to the minister is this: with 5 boards getting funding cuts, with wait lists of over 2,000 students to be assessed for speech language and school psychologists, it would seem that the announcement a few months ago that the minister once again is looking to balance the books on the backs of the kids in this province. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister: why should students and parents across this province trust their children's education to a minister who cuts funding when our most vulnerable students cannot access supports, assessments, remediation, or programs?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say that I'm very proud to be part of a government that is investing in our students. We have made sure that we have put investments in place to meet the needs of every student in this system. We have a situation with declining enrollment, and we are meeting that by being innovative in an NDP way, by providing virtual school, by succeeding in reading, skills trades. We're making sure that the math is appropriate. We are investing in the students in this province.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question this afternoon is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, paramedics have been engaged in negotiations for some time. In late February, we learned that paramedics voted 98% in favour of rejecting their employer's offer. That was with 95% coming out of the membership, Mr. Speaker. The government and paramedics are reportedly far apart. My question to the minister: has the government made any significant concessions to paramedics yet to prevent a strike?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member. We all want to know that our paramedics are there to ready to respond in emergencies across the province. No one, Mr. Speaker, I know the member opposite and definitely myself, Mr. Speaker, want to see a strike. That's why we're continuing to encourage both sides to work through the collective bargaining unit process, Mr. Speaker. We don't want to see a work disruption, and I'm very confident that the two sides will work extremely hard to avoid that.
The Honourable Member for Hants West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the minister as well for that answer. I'm certain that he does not want to see that group on the street by way of a strike, Mr. Speaker. The fact that 98% paramedics came out, though, is quite significant, and they could be off the job as soon as April the 12th. Mr. Speaker, in the days leading up to the last paramedic strike, and some of us might remember that in 1999, the Premier, then in opposition, asked for a detailed contingency plan to ensure emergency services were not disrupted. And I'll table that. That was enhanced, Mr. Speaker. These valued healthcare professionals handle about 450 calls these days in this province that Nova Scotians rely on these services. My question to the minister: what's the minister's plan for those 450 people each day who will call for an ambulance and it won't be there, potentially after April the 12th?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we're working extremely hard to encourage both sides to sit down at the bargaining table. We respect the collective bargaining process, Mr. Speaker, but knowing and being a responsible government, we are preparing in case there is a labour disruption here in the province of Nova Scotia. We're taking that job very seriously, and we're working to ensure that we have everything in order in case that happens. But I do encourage both sides to get back to the table and go through the process so that we can come to an agreeable collective agreement between the paramedics and EMC.
The Honourable Member for Hants West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the minister for that answer. And again, I'm sure that having been part of that in 1999, he nor I nor anyone else in Nova Scotia want to see that happen again in this province. Paramedics play a big role in providing overnight care, as an example, at CECs when no physician is present. This is what the NDP did when it broke its promise, though, to keep the ERs like Cobequid centres open. We put these paramedics in place, and they're a valuable asset in their communities where they're at. They also provide services in nursing homes and a variety of other things, Mr. Speaker. So Nova Scotians are going to be very concerned come April 12th if something is not done. So the question I really have today is, the minister states there is something being put together. Will he table in this House in the coming days as we lead up to this without a resolution that contingency plan so that all Nova Scotians will have some comfort in that services will be available if in fact paramedics do walk out on strike?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to reassure Nova Scotians, as Minister, as a member of this government, that my colleagues, the Minister of Labour and Work and Advanced Education, is working extremely hard to ensure that we minimize any disruption in services here in Nova Scotia, especially from healthcare providers, especially from our paramedics. That's why we believe in the principles of collective bargaining. We are optimistic. A solution can be found, Mr. Speaker, but we also are preparing.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a move to relocate jobs to a rural area, this government closed maintenance enforcement offices across the province in places like Kentville, New Glasgow, and Amherst, centralizing them in the riding of the minister formerly responsible for the Public Service Commission. Will the Minister of Justice please tell us how many trained, experienced maintenance enforcement officers actually moved with the program?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I'm very happy to report that the hiring is going on. The team is just about completed, and we're putting together quite a team of young, vibrant, energetic people that are going to live in Cape Breton, not like the opposition that are concerned about taking jobs away from there. We're looking about putting people in there to work, and so we're excited about the new team that's going to go in there and provide high-quality service.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And for the Minister's information, 11 officers were transferred from the Sydney office to New Waterford. There are over $80 million in owed court-ordered payments not going to women and children across the province. Given the loss of 24 experienced staff people, with some enforcement officers already with caseloads of over 700 cases, can the Minister of Justice tell us what impact closing 5 offices, moving these offices, opening a new office, hiring a new workforce, and training a new workforce will have on the families who are owed over $80 million?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I really value that question because it certainly outlines the difference between us as a government and the opposition. The opposition believes in just spending more money, continuing to do the same thing over and over again without making any changes or improving. Their philosophy is, if it didn't work 10 years ago, let's put more money into it and let's see if it'll change. Our belief is, let's be more creative, let's invest in people in Cape Breton. We know the talent's there, we know the intellectual wealth is there, and we're going to enrich that area by putting people in the neighborhood. We also know, Mr. Speaker, that by closing those smaller satellites, we're in a virtual world today, the technology and bringing people together and ensuring that the skills are better. So the communication system is better there today, and that team will be able to work more efficiently and effectively. Their belief is, let the money grow. We're believing at taking approaches to attack it. That's the difference between us and the opposition.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government moved jobs out of rural areas to a rural community. This is the NDP's economic development plan, Mr. Speaker. This move was purely political. The NDP used to tout its commitment to women and to children, but here is a clear example of the NDP putting politics over women's economic security. And the minister over there may be laughing, but I'll tell you, the people who are waiting for payments are not laughing right now, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister for Justice admit today that moving the maintenance enforcement program will disadvantage women and children waiting for support while their arrears payments are already further delayed, not just by delinquent payers, but by a delinquent government?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my area, for example, we moved some jobs from the Pictou County area, but we built a new correction facility in there to help bring stability back and make a sound decision that made good economic sense. We also moved, for example, invested in the LED lighting and moved jobs from Amherst and put
Order, please. Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. We will now do opposition members' business. Bill number 1, Accountability and Economic Development Assistance Act. I will now recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks so much. First of all, I certainly welcome the opportunity to speak on behalf of our caucus on Bill 1, Accountability and Economic Development Assistance Act, an act to ensure accountability in providing economic development assistance in Nova Scotia. So first, I'd like to just talk a little bit about the summary on what this bill entails and sort of what the focus of Bill 1 would be. A recipient of economic development assistance must provide upon request the details of an economic development assistance agreement signed with the province, the terms and conditions, and how the recipient is proceeding with regards to meet any targets and timelines set out in the terms of those conditions. And secondly, the government must publish this information, Mr. Speaker, on agreements and progress on a publicly accessible central website. So Nova Scotians have access to this information. That is the gist of the bill, Mr. Speaker. And before I talk about some of the merit of the bill and why it's important, I think that it certainly has, without question, has a tie-in directly to the economy and how we do economic development in this province. And just some notes from the CCPA, and I will table this document when I'm finished. This is the state of our economy as of now, March 2013. Between February 2012 and February 2013, employment across the province fell by 6,400 jobs, 6,400 Nova Scotians, Madam Speaker. There was an increase of 9.4% over the past year of unemployed youth. The employment rate for youth now stands at an unacceptable 18.5%. The unemployment rate in Nova Scotia is a full point higher than it was this time last year, a direct result of the policies by this government, and stands at 9.3%. 9.3 unemployment rate for Nova Scotia is more than 2 points higher than the national average, Madam Speaker. And the rest of the country, with the exception of New Brunswick, added jobs. We took job losses. And from the CCPA, compared to other provinces, Nova Scotia experienced the worst economic performance in Canada. And as we talked about in question period, 9.3% unemployment provincially hides the serious troubles we have outside Halifax, with places like the Valley with 10.4%, Cape Breton obviously above 17%, and that depends on where you go. You know, this bill, Madam Speaker, it's not an extremely flashy bill. It's nothing that's sort of worthy of a big announcement and a backdrop, and certainly not something that you would advertise on CBC television during Hockey Night in Canada. But you know, while it's not a big splash in terms of public interest, short term at least, it's something that has a profound impact and says a lot about a direction that the government is going. Basically, this would allow people to see and question the spending that's made by their provincial government with their tax dollars. So, you know, if you're giving people the opportunity to go online and see very detailed descriptions of economic development decisions by their provincial government, I think it's a good thing. And again, on the surface, it probably does sound like something that's, you know, not that significant, but I think it will be. And I think that as time goes on, these kinds of initiatives and this kind of legislation that you bring forth, I think speaks volumes to what kind of government you're going to have and how representative of the people your government is. I think for us, and certainly for our caucus, when we speak about Bill number 1, thank you, we talk about a new direction. And I think that new direction is allowing Nova Scotians to see every detail of what you're up to with ERDT dollars, with economic development dollars that are tax dollars. And again, we know the plight of small businesses. We know the plight of many of those SMEs and mid-sized operators, certainly in Yarmouth and the South Shore area, have been hit hard in recent times. And we all know the story and the impact that the ferries had. But, you know, I think what this bill for me, Madam Speaker, speaks to a couple things. It speaks to the voters' mindset. And I think that we would probably all agree in the legislature that people have become pretty skeptical of what's happening sort of with governments and with politicians. And I think anytime you get a chance to address that, I think it's something that's developed over time, and rightly so. It'll take a long time to gain that collective trust back and make sure people understand that that you're with them and that you're making every effort to spend their dollars properly, and you're making sure that their investments, because they are the people of Nova Scotia's investments, that they're protected. So you look at the seniors and the baby boomers and that generation. Of course they vote. They get out and they vote because they think it's their duty and their right, and they want to make sure that they impact change or they support what they believe in. Many of that demographic have probably voted for all parties. They vote for the person. They've supported sort of ideals or particular sort of strategies and platforms of particular parties, but across the board, they're going to get out and vote. And I think that, I certainly felt that in 2010 and during my by-election, and still here to a certain extent, that, that group are losing trust and losing a little bit of faith. So I think that when you publish information, that helps support that. As for, the middle, sort of my generation, we're certainly an informed age. I like to think we're interested in what's happening. When you look at and every community outside of Halifax and Halifax to a certain extent, you feel that out migration, and when you have to leave and if you get the opportunity to come back, I tell you, you really understand the value of your tax dollars, and when you work hard and you make a wage, you want to know that goes somewhere, and it's somewhere your investment is being protected. So I think that my generation probably don't vote enough, but I think they're informed, and I think that as we increase that information that we offer, that will increase their interest in politics, in governance, and certainly in economic development. And of course, for the younger generation, I'm not going to talk about length at my own endeavors in my community, but when I visit OVEC or Glace Bay High and talk about different policies and different things that the government's doing, they just sort of react as if it's over their head, and they don't get it and it doesn't apply to them. Well, as we know, of course, every decision we make in here and everything we do applies to the next generation and applies to the youth. So I think that, if they say they don't understand how politics or the nature of finances work, I think that, there's certainly an online generation. So if you could prompt them to look at some of these things, and if you had a breakdown of agreements and how the province spends money, I think that you would find that youth would be a little bit more inquisitive and would pay attention. And again, it's a generational shift that has to take place, but I think it's these types of measures that start to get you there. We're moving away from that traditional sort of model of government and of politics and getting into one where we want to put our cards on the table and let people see what we think and what we know and how good we are at our jobs, and let them evaluate for themselves. So for me, this bill, Bill 1, speaks to many things. It provides a window into government decision-making. And first of all, it says to me a few things. First of all, that we know what we're doing, and we're confident enough to put the information that we have in terms of money we've invested on your behalf. We're going to put that out there, and you can take a look, and you can decide for yourself if it's well spent. You can decide for yourself if you think that was the right thing to do. You can certainly ask questions of your local MLA, and you can send questions to that particular minister, the economic development minister, to see if that minister or the department has those answers. And it also tells people, folks, that we do our homework. There's a lot to these, and I think that some of the decisions, I've said this in the past with respect to the corporate support that we've offered as a province here with this government in the last few years, they were done hastily. And I think that if you look at some of the sort of those integral issues and the key issues for business development or a business venture or a business plan, it's very specific. First of all, we're representing money that's owned by the taxpayers. So what's the cost? What's the overall cost? What's the social cost? What are the financial costs? And what is it that we're supporting? I think people want to know that, and generally, I think people feel these days that this is their money, and obviously it is, and these are their projects. So that's a good thing, but we've got to show them that you know, what they're spending is worthwhile, Madam Speaker. Also, the economic impact is significant. Of course, it's not just about what the revenue is or what the sort of at the end of the day what the economic generation is going to be. It's about the entire impact. So what do you spend? What are your investments? What are those costs involved? And then at the end of the day, what is the net gain for the people of Nova Scotia and the regions that these initiatives are found in? And you know, how much better off are we by making this decision? Return on investment, of course, is along those lines. What did we put in, and what are we getting in return? The long-term viability. This is a problem that, you know, this is a corporate welfare problem that's existed for many generations, but it becomes, we fund organizations, corporations, initiatives, and they stay as long as the money's gone. So it's used to prop up operational losses or operations in general. And then when those funding streams dry up, then it's less feasible to be here. That's not the investment that we want to make. They're not the investments that we should be making, and that's kind of a direction that we have to change. And I think people believe in that, and they want the companies to be here for a long time. Again, it speaks to the fact that supporting entrepreneurs and investing in those small businesses and coming up with initiatives to spend that $600 million that doesn't involve one big check to one industry that sort of ties the community to those industries. So I think they're important, and of course the regional implications. I think that, you know, what a region will look like after those investments are made is something that we have to consider, and you know, that's all out there. If you've got a mechanism to provide that information to Nova Scotians, I think that's all the better. And they know, whether it be Cape Breton or Yarmouth or Metro or the South Shore or anywhere, all points in between, what is the impact for that area, and obviously impact for the entire province. And Nova Centre would be one example of that. It also tells us when we publicize this information is that we're basing our information on facts, and the facts are all there. So if you lay out the details to the extent possible of what this investment was and where that investment came from, I think that you'll be able to allow people to rest assured that you've put the time in, and as I said, the homework, and you've put that analysis to work, and you figured out this is what the cost is going to be, this is the net benefit, this is why we signed the agreement with this firm or this operation, this is the kind of thing we support, and it's facts-based. And finally, and certainly not least, sort of left for last, we're open to scrutiny. If we're a department like economic development and we're spending $200 million tax dollars per year, we've got to be making good decisions. And if we're making good decisions, first of all, I've always believed that starts with the minister, and it's a philosophy that's pushed through the department. But if we're making those decisions and we believe in those decisions, and you know, we can argue with the government about some of these decisions that are made. Projects certainly is one that I always like to talk about, because I think that was an industry that was growing anyway, and we supported a firm that will better be able to compete using tax dollars, and I still believe that, and I'll always believe that. So unless someone can tell me otherwise, had I seen that on a website prior to, then it would certainly ring alarm bells for me. So I think that's important to keep in mind, and we've got to put the information out there and let Nova Scotians see it. By adopting this legislation, again, this is where it's bigger than it first seems. This will change the government, and it'll change the departments that we're talking about with this one ERDT. Simply put, and this isn't just about the current government, although I think there's a certain extent, the minister will have to be better. The cabinet will have to be better. NSBI will have to be better. The funding agencies that we rely on, like the RDAs, they will have to be better. Well, if we're providing a broad stroke of information, publicized to Nova Scotians, and we want them to look at it and we want them to scrutinize that information, then we can put it out there. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think that if you have a department that understands that their jobs and their performance is important, and they have a very specific role to play, I think that will improve the performance of that department. And I think that when you introduce legislation that says everything that we do will be on a public website, on display for people to read and people understand, then I think that you're going to have people looking closely and figuring out how it affects them, and what the impact is going to be. I think that'll cause change in the department in a lot of ways, because again, you will be directly measured on what you have done, what your contribution has been to a particular line item in the ERDT budget, which again is substantial at $200 million per year. So, you know, if we're talking about releasing information, we're talking about things like the terms of the agreements. Now, that's not, we're not looking at private sector protected information. We don't want to jeopardize any sort of company or firm that the province of Nova Scotia invests in. But there are, you know, generalities of the agreement, and we've seen them with after the fact, DSME, Scanwood, those types of things. That information would have been helpful. And again, if you have people who are interested in this, or people who are interested in this, so you would have those in the financial sector, those in the legal, the accounting, looking at these types of investments and trying to figure out if they're good for us. We've always been a proponent of loan guarantees as opposed to grants that are non-repayable. And I think that if you had information on loan guarantees and showed sort of what the terms of those loans were, it would certainly make sense. The established job targets, if people knew what the job targets were for a specific investment, I think it would make a difference for them. And I think they would follow closely what the development and the progress of those job targets are for a particular entity. And I think that the media would be interested in that because it becomes a public issue, and obviously that's in a large case that's what drives the media. I think establishing the job targets, the time frame, and of course the government rationale. Again, this comes back to the people who are making decisions. This department, economic development, in my opinion, has to be absolutely led by the minister and his philosophy and his understanding of his or her understanding of the investments they're making and the things that we're getting into on behalf of the taxpayer of Nova Scotia. That's shared to the Deputy Minister, and the Deputy Minister is responsible to pass that through the department. So I think they're the things that people want to see. They want to see where the research has been. They want to see what other agreements were explored that are similar. They want to see the core competencies of the region or of the company or of the sector that we're looking at investing in. So I think that you know, when governments are showing the information that they're choosing to, the agreements that they're choosing to get into, and they're showing that information to the taxpayers and to the people of Nova Scotia, I think we're better served for that. And you know, if looking back, if we were to talk about DSME and that investment, I think should that have been publicized, I think that people would have had a little bit more to say about it, and only after the fact. And again, look, it's human nature. People make decisions, and you have to live with those decisions. And that's the reality of government, Madam Speaker. So I think that, you know, we're at a point now where we haven't hit even close to those job targets for DSTN. 60 million invested, and now we're switching gears in terms of that facility. So I think that's one that would have been nice to be out there. In closing, my thought on this is one way to let people know that we're open and accountable, and we're diversifying the economy, and we've got to get back to focusing on small business and entrepreneurs, because they are, after a while, what make the economy pump. And I think that it's time for a new direction in general. No more corporate handouts and no more blank checks. And you know, information is important to people because they want to see what we're up to in this generation, this day and age, 2013. It's worth it, and what are we so afraid of? And with that, I'll take my seat. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the Honourable Minister for Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I did prepare some written words, and I know that my time is very limited, but I think I'm just going to sort of go off the cuff a little bit, because I heard the member mentioned at least 8 things that I'd like to speak of that are directly related to Bill number 1. And I heard first that about things being done in the world of economic and rural development and tourism and in business, and not to be done in a hastily manner. And I think it's for those that have been in government, and for those that have been, if I can say, around the block at least once, the deals that are done in economic and rural development are certainly not done with haste. Most of the deals that we do today are an accumulation of years and years of hard work. Sometimes what happens in the world of business when a deal is done with a company, especially a company that's coming here for the first time, then things begin to move rather hastily. But the actual lead up to that, if I can call it that, haste period, is very timely, and it's years in the making. So I just want to point that out. The second one that I heard was the return on investment, and I can say that for the 4 years, or the almost 4 years that we have been in government, our return on investment is great. We don't do investments where the province of Nova Scotia is going to do money. When we do, and a good example would be payroll rebates. And the member mentioned, and I got down here as number 4, that companies oftentimes leave when the payroll rebate expires. And I heard the member say that's not what he said. He said something to that effect. And I want to make it clear that payroll rebates are paid in arrears. So when a company that's coming to Nova Scotia and is the recipient of a payroll rebate, the way the deal works is that the company has to reach certain milestones. And generally speaking, those are employment milestones. There are certain targets that that company has to meet. If the company does not meet those targets, then there's no cost to government. There's no cost to taxpayers. But it's a great incentive. It's been a very, very good tool for us to use, and certainly in a number of cases, our return on investment. And this isn't all done. And one would think, and I think maybe from the outside looking in, that this is strictly economic and rural development and tourism, but we also run all of our numbers are run by our finance department. So we do have some checks and balances in place to ensure that we are making good investments, sound investments, and investing taxpayers' money in an appropriate way. There was also some discussion that I heard around, and I did hear this very clearly, corporate welfare being mentioned. And, you know, I hear that, and certainly for me, I sometimes wonder what somebody means when they talk about corporate welfare, Madam Speaker. Now, when somebody says, well, this government is accusing the government of corporate welfare, and I'm going to use Irving as an example. Now, I heard in this House, members mention corporate welfare in association with Irving and the shipbuilding contract that we assisted in Irving getting. And I can remember very, very clearly Mr. Irving, the CEO and president of Irving, getting up in public and saying publicly, if it hadn't have been for the problems of Nova Scotia's involvement, we would never have gotten that contract, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, what that means. Now, Madam Speaker, I was very attentive when the member from Cape Breton spoke, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker, I was very attentive, and I wish I could have my time. And so corporate welfare associated with them, that is 11,500 jobs. That's 30 years of employment in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, that we wouldn't have got. Irving wouldn't have got. The reason that Mr. Irving says they would not have gotten that contract without the province involvement was because there was a clause in there. One of the terms to get that contract had to do with the costs to Canada. And, you know, if we hadn't have been involved, if we didn't invest millions to get back billions, that money would be out there somewhere else, but not in Nova Scotia, Madam Speaker. So we did the right thing. We did the right things for Nova Scotia, Madam Speaker. We made that investment. So now, as a result of that, in the future, we are going to have more money so that we can invest in education and health and social services, all those things that cost taxpayers money, Madam Speaker. We are going to have we're going to have billions of dollars as a result of that contract. So the future is bright. I look at, so that's, you know, I also heard, Madam Speaker, reference being made to the website. I agree, Madam Speaker, that our website should be more simplistic. It should be more user-friendly. Thank you. It should be more user-friendly to the consumers. And, Madam Speaker, we've done just that. We've done just that. We've even taken all those things that are associated with small and medium-sized businesses, we've bundled them up. And I'm looking forward to estimates, because it's during estimates that I'll be able to get into more detail about our website and all those things that we've done for small and medium-sized business. Because, Madam Speaker, we know here in Nova Scotia, we know the contributions. We know the contributions that small and medium-sized business make to our economy. And back to that Irving contract, Madam Speaker, because those payrolls, the money that those 11,500 workers are going to earn, not only is it going to have a direct impact on the tax revenues coming into the province, Madam Speaker, but just think of the impact those payrolls are going to have on car dealerships, on grocery stores, on movie theaters. And, you know, and these are going to be the backbone. It's going to have an enormous impact. And this 11,500 is not only in Halifax. It's around the entire province. That's why we spent money with the Duke study, so that now small and medium-sized businesses, hundreds of them, here in Nova Scotia will know how they can take advantage of the supply chain that's going to be created by that shipbuilding contract, Mr. Speaker. Unlike other governments in the past, Madam Speaker, in the past, I can remember when they talked about offshore. I remember, Madam Speaker, when they talked about offshore and what they didn't do during the offshore, they didn't prepare Nova Scotians for discovery with the offshore. So we would have thought that governments of the past would have learned from that experience, so that when the offshore came onshore, they would have been prepared. But what happened to those jobs when offshore came onshore? The same thing with they weren't Nova Scotians getting those jobs. They had to bring people in. So what we're trying to do is we are forward thinking. We are looking towards the future. We are trying to avoid the mistakes of the past, Madam Speaker. We are trying to avoid those. We want to make Nova Scotia a better place. When we talk about corporate welfare, so I get a little confused. IBM, a global company that's setting up a center of excellence. Where? Right here. In Nova Scotia. You know, they could have set up anywhere in the world. IBM could be anywhere, but they chose Nova Scotia. But there's reasons for that. You know, 500 jobs. In the fall, when we made an announcement around projects and IBM, nearly 1,000 workers. A great day. I was here in the House when those companies We're here in the gallery.
Lots of them are Nova Scotians wanting to come home.
Do you know what, Madam Speaker? Projects alone. Do you know what? They have a great supply working out west that work for projects in Calgary. Guess what? They are now going to be able to come home. Going to be able to come home and spend their money. Now, you know, members of the opposition, both parties, made fun. They insulted those companies. And Madam Speaker, we know that those companies, including Irvin, wrote letters to the other. I myself, Madam Speaker, I myself, when I was embarrassed that day as the Minister of Economic and Rural Development, I wrote a letter to the company, wanting them to know that this government wasn't off the same thought process, that we valued them coming to Nova Scotia, that we appreciated the fact that they were going to locate here and bring hundreds of jobs with them, bring hundreds of thousands of dollars with them to add to our economy, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker. So I also heard during the second reading by the member opposite about staff and about the role that staff has to play, about not only staff but also about the minister, and I think the words were he or she, whoever he or she may be. I also heard about the deputy minister and all of those at the head of staff. And I want to say right here today, Madam Speaker, that I'm very, very fortunate. I'm one of the luckiest ministers in government because I have good, competent staff. I have staff that care. I have staff that care about Nova Scotia. I have staff that care about investments that other companies make in Nova Scotia, Madam Speaker. I'm proud. I'm proud, and I would sing the praises. I would sing the praises of those staff anytime, anywhere, any place, Madam Speaker. You know, I heard it mentioned also, Madam Speaker, about RDAs. Well, RDAs, Madam Speaker, they're on the wind down, Madam Speaker, as there's a new way of doing things. They're called RINs, Madam Speaker. But what we've done with this, and this is completely different than what previous governments have done, and this is being led by the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities. The municipalities are playing a lead role in this. The RDAs are winding down, RINs are coming aboard. You know, there's a new way. Times have changed, and we knew that. We knew that when we came into government, and we knew that if we continued down the same path, if we continued down the same path that previous governments had done for the last 20 years, guess what, Madam Speaker? We'd have the same results. We did not want the same results as previous governments. We knew we had to do things different. And that's what we're doing, Madam Speaker. We are doing things different. We are creating jobs. We are making things for the first time in years. I walk the streets of Nova Scotia, and what I see and what I hear are voices and faces of optimism. For the first time in years, Madam Speaker, I hear people that are optimistic about the future. They're optimistic about projects. They're optimistic about IBM. They're optimistic about the Irving shipyard. They're optimistic about so many things that are going on in this province. So many things that weren't going on in past years, but we are making it happen. Now, we are leading Atlantic Canada. Our unemployment is the lowest in Atlantic. We are the leaders. We are the leaders. I see PEI adopting some of our strategies when it comes to health. I see New Brunswick adopting some of our strategies when it comes to economic and rural development, Madam Speaker. You know, this is all complementary. because people are sitting back. People are sitting back looking at what we're doing, and they're saying, Nova Scotia's doing it right. We want to emulate what Nova Scotia's doing, and by golly, that's what they're doing. What a compliment that is. So we want to keep on moving this province forward. We want to. We see people in Nova Scotia so inspired. We've talked to chambers of commerce, who are now saying, "Great, this is the way to go." We're very, very confident, Madam Speaker, and we know that Nova Scotians, like any other jurisdiction in Canada, they want good, high-paying jobs. What we've also done in preparation for the jobs of the future, we've invested through the PIP in 400 companies. 400 companies. And also through PIP, we've invested in tens of thousands of Nova Scotians so that they can have the right skills, not only for the jobs of today, but, Madam Speaker, for the jobs of tomorrow.
Hear, hear.
We are preparing Nova Scotians for the future, a future that is bright. And, you know, we've invested. Nobody in the opposition wants to talk about Port Hawkesbury New Page. 1,400 jobs. 1,400 jobs that we saved there. You know, Madam Speaker, I got Christmas cards. From workers at Port Hawkesbury newspaper. They were saying thank you. They said thank you. Those are 1,400 jobs that the Liberals, if they had their way, Port Hawkesbury New Page would not be there today. 1,400 lost jobs. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, we are on the track, we are in control, and we are moving up. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Now recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'll be very happy to speak to Bill 1 in a few moments, but I really can't let it go not speaking to some of the comments that the minister had said, and then I'll move on to really the comments that I do want to take to Bill 1 and the bill that's being provided to us by the Liberal Party here today. But, you know, first of all, I do find it interesting that the minister continues to talk about a number of jobs in the Port Hawkesbury area. At New Page, he keeps quoting a 1,400 number, one that is not substantiated by a piece of paper or by anything that he's been able to table in this House of Assembly. So maybe what we can ask for from him, if he's so optimistic about the economy of Nova Scotia, that he might be able to table that in this House of Assembly, just to show us. I mean, right now I'm seeing 150 people working at Port Hawkesbury right now. Maybe if you roll that out by a little bit, I'm still not getting to 1,400 jobs in that area. So maybe, you know, he can provide that information to us, and I look forward to the minister to providing that information to us as well. The Minister of EDRDT also said that he was confident with the economy of Nova Scotia, yet, you know, we're still short a whole bunch of jobs in a whole bunch of places around Nova Scotia. Maybe it would be great if I would offer my chauffeuring services to the minister to drive him around Nova Scotia to see the tranquility that we have in our Nova Scotia towns today, because there's no jobs, nobody's working. That's what I want to show that minister, to bring him around and have a look at it. Come to Yarmouth and see how it's going. Go to Glace Bay and see what's happening. Come to Clare and Digby and all those areas that there's absolutely nothing going on since this government took place. Even down in Chester, I'm sure that they're crying for jobs, looking for something to happen, because that minister that's responsible for it has done nothing. It's funny how a little bit of criticism makes them get all spinny here on trying to find and blame other people as they go. Madam Speaker, I do offer the Minister of Economic and Rural Development to come to my community, to come to the community for the member for Yarmouth, to see what's going on, and maybe to find solutions for areas like that are seeing the highest unemployment rates that they've ever seen. To find a way to talk to the 7,600 people who have not had a job. The member for Truro talks about the global recession. How come every other province in Canada is doing well except for Nova Scotia? Because there's an NDP government in Canada.
Please. The honourable member for Argyle has the floor.
Thank you very much. And it does get everybody warmed up when we talk about this, because ultimately, you know, as we travel around Nova Scotia, and I know that the members of the NDP have traveled around Nova Scotia too. They were just in Cape Breton the other day, and I'm sure they got to see some of the good things and, of course, some of the bad things that are happening there, and the request of those communities. And we're hearing the same thing. Now, let's get to Bill 1 for a little bit. Bill 1. You know, what does this really do? And I listened quite attentively to the member for Glace Bay when he talked about a number of things. Some things I do have to agree with. That he did say that Nova Scotians tend to be skeptical of politicians and they're losing faith in the political process. He also said that we need to put information out there for Nova Scotians to see it. I think those are very important lines as I continue. I can say that this, in my mind, and what I've seen in my time here at the House, that this is a very typical Liberal initiative. Lots of words, but doesn't actually accomplish anything, Madam Speaker. The Liberals would have Nova Scotians believe that this is a cure for Nova Scotia's sick economy, but it's not a panacea, Madam Speaker. It's not a cure. And you know what? I have kids, and many of you have kids too. This is sort of like a Spider-Man Band-Aid. It just sort of covers up a little boo-boo that actually doesn't do anything good. It looks good, but it really doesn't do anything. They want people to believe that it'll put an end to the decades of old practices of bribing companies to create and maintain jobs in our province. The Liberals complain. About corporate bailouts. I'm sure you guys will enjoy this one. You guys will enjoy this one here in the NDP. The Liberals complain about corporate bailouts, but when the time comes to put their money where their mouth is, like introduction of bills like this one to stop bailouts, they introduce a bill to help government keep better track of the money that they're giving out in the first place. Typical Liberal approach, all talk, no action, nothing about sizzle and no steak. Madam Speaker, open and accountable. This bill pretends to be about transparency. If passed, bills about putting information on a website so that people can see it and judge. You know, listen, Madam Speaker, the Liberal track record on transparency under that Liberal leader has not been very good. Matter of fact, Madam Speaker, it's kind of horrible. The one big decision that the member for Annapolis had to do as leader, the one test that Nova Scotians can look at to see if he's fit to be a premier, was whether to use the tainted trust funds his leadership inherited from the dark days of previous Liberal regimes. Instead, by all appearances, Madam Speaker, he chose to use the money, Madam Speaker, over principle. Instead of coming clean with Nova Scotians and saying we have ample grounds to suspect some or all of this money came from toll gating, he chose to allow his party to use the trust money. Instead of being transparent and saying we're just going to use it, the current leader chose to allow the money to flow until it was pried from his grasp. Instead of being transparent and just admitting he was being used, they created a web involving internally restricted funds. Bill 1 that we're debating today doesn't say, we need to do We need to do things differently to create jobs in this province. Doesn't say that, Madam Speaker. Bill 1 says, let's continue to do the same thing that we've complained about in expensive attack ads. Let's keep doing that. But let's add a website while we're at it. It'll make it look like we're actually doing something. It says we're going to build a database and a website to let people know that we're spending in this province and how much money we're actually taking from taxpayers' money and handing out to big business. It puts into law procedures about how to document and details of a failed system. Putting those details on a public website, though, won't tell Nova Scotians everything that we don't already know. Everyone knows that the bailouts aren't working. Just ask the 7,600 Nova Scotians who lost their job last year. They'll tell you that handouts to corporations aren't putting food on their tables, or paying for the kids' braces, or putting oil in their tank. The only job this bill will create is the one for the guy who looks after the website in the first place. And it will create a bunch of reports and forms and red tape that actually will kill jobs in Nova Scotia. It's just a bad idea. This bill is a bad idea. Again, it tries to create a false impression that the Liberal Party is about transparency. But here are some things that they should be posting on their own website, because I know they have a website. I probably have a couple of them now. One, I think they should write. I mean, maybe the member for Clayton Park, Halifax Clayton Park, could write some of these things down. Maybe as I'm saying that. I know they're going to be enhanced. I'll print them out for her too. One, if they hadn't had the use of those trust funds for all those years, how without huge borrowing could the Liberals have spent money on expensive advertising and polling? Not just before they were forced to get rid of the fund, Madam Speaker, even in the last year, because of the shape of their books today, would be vastly different if the Liberal leader had to decide that we'd have nothing to do with that money. Madam Speaker, I went to their meeting just the other day. I know the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville was there too, and there was very little information on where those trust funds actually went. Madam Speaker, they could on their own website, like they're proposing in Bill 1, is name names. How about they do that? And this is information that maybe the minister should adopt as well, to put it on theirs as well. Who did they transfer the funds to? Name names. In specific, who are the current trustees or directors who control the money, and what ties have they had with the Liberal Party over the years? Because Nova Scotians will want to be able to see and judge whether the money has been put out of the reach of the Liberals. That's the information, I think, that we should be seeing in Bill 1. All the information that should be available to it.
Order, please. It's becoming difficult to hear the speaker. The honourable member for, sorry, to hear the member. The honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, Bill 1 says we need to create a website to list off the information that is available, whether it's through the economic development, and exactly where those bailouts are going. And maybe they could use that same thought on their own website and providing Nova Scotians some information on where the trust fund money went to. That we had no information when we went to the Liberal AGM just a few weeks ago. The third point that maybe that they should put up on their website that could be actually a part of an economic development planning would be to disclose who paid for any part of the bill for the polling, the research and advertising done since they were forced to give up the funds. And maybe that's some information, that we can find out about those contracts that are being provided to Irving and those organizations, of how that all laid out. Because we have been asking for information on these loans over the last number of months. So, why don't we just learn from that to actually roll it out into the Liberal Party as well? All of it. Who paid for David Hurley's? Who paid for David Hurley's company's work? Does any part of it come from policy research conducted by a third party, like, say, the former trust fund? Or does it come from any part from the federal Liberals? Those are some good things. Maybe we can talk about those. You know, maybe the website that they're talking about in Bill 1, they could emulate it with theirs as well, is to commit to full ongoing disclosure. To keep with the money principles in this bill, the Liberals should put their money where their mouths are and disclose annually the sources of payments and co-payments and loan provisions in any way of data, polling, research, etc., so that Nova Scotians can plainly see that none of it came from the old, tainted trust fund, and should keep the public informed about who controls the old trust funds and what it is going to be spent on. Now, the Liberal leader had any significant experience in politics, he would know that judgments a person makes on such issues are all that anyone has to weigh their credibility on. And what did they do about it? And what did they do about it? They did nothing. They had a little tiny piece in their financials that said something. It was a very small. I know the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville can say it, and it had no information of where their trust fund went. So, you know, maybe that trust fund on the side is doing some polling for them. Maybe they're doing some advertising for them. We don't know because they won't tell us. So, back to the bill a little bit. It's time to stop the insanity here, Madam Speaker. It's time to stop corporate handouts and bailouts, and it's time to truly transform Nova Scotia's economy. You know, we need to get the fundamentals right. We need to get the fundamentals right. Lower taxes, lower power rates, stop wasteful spending. We don't have to bribe corporations to be here, Madam Speaker. We don't need a fancy website and a whole bunch of reports that's going to keep track of those bailouts. I mean, you know, in the consolidated statements, I'm sure every year we can have a look at where our money is going, where taxpayers' money is going. And I know there's many press releases that are put out by the Communications Nova Scotia. That's a whole other issue that we can be talking about in this House of Assembly. You know, we know, and they tell us where taxpayers' money is being spent in this province. A bill that sort of shows that maybe we can be a little more transparent, cuts to the problem that this Liberal Party has had for a number of years now, is that they can't be transparent themselves to what's going on. If we stop pulling the wool over the eyes of Nova Scotians with silly bills like this one, we won't do anything and concentrate on creating a provincial economy with the conditions that encourage growth and job creations, and that Nova Scotians will be better off. Some of the comments that came from the member for Glace Bay, and you know, I know that he had a number of good comments in here as well. You know, there was some good things in here. You know, and some things that he did say. We need to do our homework. We need to do their homework.
No, go back to the trust fund.
You know, you know, I just hope that they can do it with their financials. You know, maybe the leader of the Liberal Party can stand here in this legislature during this time and tell us, you know, exactly what are they doing with it. Maybe, you know, the member of Glace Bay also said that we need to put the information out there for Nova Scotians to see it. So let's get their own information out there so that we all can make a decision on whether or not that they're being forthright with Nova Scotians. Bill 1, again, in my estimation, is nothing but a little bit of window dressing, something that goes to the core of what maybe the Liberal Party can provide us with, is that level of transparency in the province of Nova Scotia, because they haven't showed it to us in the past, and I don't think they're going to be able to show it to us in the future. With that, I know I'm a few seconds short of my full time here, but I really want to see what they're going to be saying in response to my comments, in response to the comments from the Minister of Economic Development. I look forward to the comments that are going to be coming from the member for Halifax Clayton Park, because I'm sure she has all the answers, as she always does. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it's a pleasure for me to wrap up the debate today on Bill number 1, which is Accountability in Economic Development Assistance Act. And Madam Speaker, I don't want to be deflected from discussing this bill because I think there is great substance in this bill, absolutely. And I think that really, you know, that we have a bill here that is in response to $500+ million that has been given out to large corporations in this province in just the last 3.5 years. And we know that with that amount of money that's been committed and handed out, and to go to the minister's point just for a moment, he said that we don't give out money. We give job guarantees and money's tied to performance. That is not true. We don't have that information. We have no way of getting it, Madam Speaker. When we try to FOIP this kind of information and make it public, we're told repeatedly that it's proprietary, that we can't share it, that it's, you know, that companies are willing to take public money, but they're not willing to provide information back. And that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. Madam Speaker, you know, people are frustrated by not knowing the details. Daewoo, for example, was not a job guarantee loan. It was a direct equity investment. It was the first big deal done by the NDP government for the old Trenton Works. $60 million went into that directly, money bought into it for an equity stake in that business. Now we were told there would be 500 jobs at that location. And Madam Speaker, we know there's been at least a couple of job layoffs, but we had a caucus meeting in that area in Pictou in, I think it was May, and when we drove by on a work day, there were 6 cars in the parking lot. 6 cars during the workday in this facility. There was nothing going on in that area at all, and we have a $60 million stake in it. So we would like to know, what were the deal? What is the requirement? What do we get back for $60 million invested in a community where we want to see the jobs, we want to see the improvement, but we don't believe that the money just thrown around is going to make a difference. And Madam Speaker, let's talk about what the minister said. Madam Speaker, I don't know if people can hear me right now, and I'd like to reply to the minister's comments. The minister spoke about this as well, saying that years and years go into these deals that are made. And I don't see how that is possible when the Minister of Finance entered into a deal with IBM where clearly we were approached, there was no call for proposals, we handed away the baby and the bathwater, out it goes for a revenue neutral, as we had today, in this case cost neutral, where when have you ever heard, pardon me, Madam Speaker, when have you ever heard of outsourcing government services and not saving money? When have you ever heard of that? If you're going to outsource, it's because it's a better way to do it. It saves you money. But we have guaranteed IBM as much money as we pay today to run that service, and we've guaranteed them, and I'd love to see this on a website, we've guaranteed them an industry inflation escalator. Nobody knows what the industry inflation rate is for technology. It's not the cost of living, we know that. So we've signed on to a deal with a guaranteed increase that we can't even define, or it is not defined for the public here in Nova Scotia, for the opposition here in Nova Scotia. So I think the idea of saying that if you're going to get public money in millions of dollars of public money, or smaller amounts, that you can be upfront and honest about the details in that. And Madam Speaker, that is the reason for this bill before us. It is about opening up the door to accountability and to openness, because the government has been very, very closed about information that they will provide on any of these deals. And Madam Speaker, I'm glad to see projects here working in Nova Scotia, but I believe they would have come without the money that we've guaranteed them for jobs. And Madam Speaker, the Minister of Community Services maybe forgets that the consulting engineers of Nova Scotia as a group sent a letter to this government, and they said this is blatantly unfair that we have a thriving engineering sector here in Nova Scotia, and that bringing in
Order,
one
please.
company...
The chatter's getting a little high. Perhaps you can take your conversations in the back. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park has the floor.
Madam Speaker, it is my opportunity to speak to this bill, and I'd like to point out that the Consulting Engineers of Nova Scotia, as an association with many, many different companies that are active and successful here in Nova Scotia, signed a letter to the government saying it is simply unfair to offer these extra amounts of money that allow projects to pay more for their engineers than the companies that are homegrown here in Nova Scotia are getting, and that in fact a lot of the engineers will come from their existing companies and simply move over for the higher salaries that projects can pay. So it's not going to add to the workforce, it's not going to add to the success or prosperity of this province. And I think that you have to listen to the business community when they speak out, and that this has been done in haste. That's my point. Was it done with years and years of study? No. Was there any consultation with consulting engineers in Nova Scotia? No, clearly. So that wasn't done from the Department of Economic Development, was not done with due diligence and with care. And that is exactly what we're asking for. If the government needed to come clean and put the information on a website or make it available to the public, and you can choose your means, but it should not be through FOIPOP, because that's not the right way to go, to force people to pay a lot of money to receive information that relates to how public monies are being handed out around this province. And Madam Speaker, we know that the NDP government has now been characterized as being, surprisingly, almost astoundingly, as a government of corporate handouts. Whoever would have thought? I noticed, Madam Speaker, in the throne speech the other day, the government felt they had to say that they still stand true to their values, because nothing they have done in the last 4 years really has reinforced any of the values that people associated with the NDP. And that's why this bill, Bill number 1, is calling for more transparency. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now recognize the Deputy House Leader for the Official Opposition. Deputy House Leader for the, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That concludes the business for the Official Opposition for today. I'll now turn it over to the Government House Leader.
Thank you. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, tomorrow the hours will be from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And after the daily routine and question period, we'll be doing address and reply from speech from the throne. I wish you now rise to meet at the hours of 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. tomorrow.
Thank you. The motion is that we do now rise to meet again tomorrow, March the 28th, between the hours of 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. We've arrived at the moment of interruption, and I now call under a motion under Rule 5.5, the late debate, as submitted by the Honourable Member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville, which reads, therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House agree that the Liberal Party's opposition to clean Atlantic Canadian power from Muskrat Falls is in the best interest of the world's 4th largest energy utility, Hydro-Quebec, and not Nova Scotian families. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. Glad to rise, speak on this motion that I put forward today. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House agree that the Liberal Party's opposition to clean Atlantic Canadian power from Muskrat Falls is in the best interest of the world's 4th largest energy utility, Hydro-Quebec, and not Nova Scotia families. Madam Speaker, I've had the opportunity over the past number of weeks to go around the province with the Minister of Energy talking about the province's plan for lower fare rates for Nova Scotians. And Madam Speaker, I want to take us back to how we got to where we are today, and that is the fact that for the longest time, and I've said this many times in this House, about the expensive regime that we've been under the Conservatives and Liberals of tying ourselves to coal. Madam Speaker, one of the things the history books have told us was that in 1977, the Liberal Premier of the day said that we moved from one expensive fossil fuel to another, moving from oil to coal. And one of the things that at that time, the utility of the day was asking for an extremely high rate increase, but at the end of the day, it was given to them of a 47.2% increase. And the Liberal Premier of the day said, well, at least it wasn't as much as utility had asked for. Madam Speaker, you know, that's the type of thing that we can expect from the Liberal Party. Continuing to move down a road that wouldn't see a benefit to Nova Scotians, Madam Speaker. This project of the Muskrat Falls is an Atlantic Canadian solution, Madam Speaker, to an Atlantic Canadian problem. One of the things that the Liberal Party does not mention, Madam Speaker, is the issue of the greenhouse gas emissions, reductions that the federal government is asking all provinces to impose.